2021 is a momentous year for many gaming franchises. Some of the most influential and popular video game series of all time just so happen to be facing their major anniversaries this year. With that in mind, now it seems good a time as any to look back at these famous gaming franchises, recounting my own personal experiences with them, and celebrating their history. Welcome to a new series on this channel. Welcome to Gaming Anniversaries. In 1986, after Nintendo R&D3 released the very successful Legend of Zelda, along with Super Mario Bros. The previous year, Nintendo's other major development division, R&D1, headed up by Gunpei Yokoi, the creator behind the Game & Watch line, was tasked with creating more action games to supplement Miyamoto's games. Two projects were worked on simultaneously, and while one of them would be a simple platformer based around vertical scrolling levels and Kid Icarus, the other game was far more ambitious, blending together the platforming of Super Mario Bros. With the exploration of the Legend of Zelda. It would also be markedly different in tone to the happy-go-lucky nature of Mario, and the epic nature of Legend of Zelda, as it was to be a far more cinematic experience. Inspired by Ridley Scott's Alien film, this game broke new ground for video games with its platforming exploration style combined with its focus on atmosphere. The use of a dark black background directly contrasted that of Super Mario Bros. And the Legend of Zelda, and it would supplement its main music themes with more atmospherically tinged pieces of music. Metroid was a true groundbreaking game at the time, and the start of what would become a long-running franchise, iterating and improving upon its design as time went on. However, unlike Mario and Zelda, Metroid has struggled to find widespread appeal. It has certainly done better than a lot of the video game franchises, but in spite of several critically acclaimed games and being credited as a hugely influential game in terms of the game industry as a whole, especially given how Castlevania were later to take after it, and also how it has been a huge genre in the indie gaming scene, sales numbers of the Metroid franchise have struggled to match that of some of Nintendo's other big hitters. And while the games are relatively well known on the internet, and Metroid is a large staple of gaming culture, outside of this, the games are considered relatively niche. Samus as a character is quite well known thanks to her appearance in every single Super Smash Bros. Game to date, but Metroid has always struggled to sell in its homeland of Japan, and has consistently sold better in the West, to the point where Nintendo doesn't really know what to do with Metroid as a franchise. Massive multi-year hiatuses have limited the number of games that the Metroid series has produced, but the franchise has been kept alive thanks to the ideas of Kensuke Tanabe and Yoshio Sakamoto, the latter being one of the co-creators of the Metroid franchise alongside the late Gunpei Yokoi. In the year of the 35th anniversary, we have the long-awaited Metroid 5 finally coming out, with another new Metroid game on the horizon. In total, there will be about 14 or 15 games, depending on whether you count one of the modes in one game as its own game, considering it was released separately. That accounts for 11 mainline games, 2 to 3 spin-offs and 1 demo. It will be 12 mainline games before the end of the year, and you bet I'm looking forward to Metroid Dread. So this video is going to be a celebration of Metroid's 35th anniversary, but I'm going to do it by talking about my experiences with playing the Metroid franchise. I played every single Metroid game in some capacity, so I feel well qualified to talk about the series. However, in spite of the games being this adventure-based platforming style, I got into Metroid via a different route. I was a teenager at the time, you see, and what kind of games were popular with teenagers at the time? GTA and first-person shooters, that was what. Naturally, though I had my own personal gaming preferences at the time, others were getting into first-person shooters like Halo and Time Splitters. Naturally, Nintendo wanted in on the first-person shooter market in some way, and with the release of the Nintendo DS, they had a way in. Time Splitters seemed somewhat interesting to me at the time, even though I'd only played the multiplayer, but FPSs were multiplayer of choice at the time for many in my age group. As it turns out, however, after acquiring a Nintendo DS second hand, and given it was the big new handheld and upgrade to the GBA I've been playing on before, I was able to get 3 games with it: Super Mario 64 DS, the game I most wanted for the system, Need for Speed Underground 2, and the first game in this Metroid Gaming Anniversaries video, Metroid Prime Hunters First Hunt.
The first Metroid game is in captivity.
After clamouring for a Nintendo DS back in 2005, the year it came out over here in the UK, I eventually got one second hand. The previous user had sold it with 3 games, with First Hunt actually be a packaged game with a Nintendo DS in the early days. While I spent a fair amount of time on Mario 64 DS and Need for Speed Underground 2, one day out of curiosity I decided to fire up Prime Hunters First Hunt. In spite of it only being a demo and not really understanding what the Metroid franchise was, I decided to try it. Picked the combat trial and prepared to face my first encounter with a Metroid. Suffice to say, I learned the hard way how to deal with these things. First Hunt in solo play was relatively simple, with not a lot to do. It is a demo after all. There are 3 modes to pick from: Regulator, Survivor and Morph Ball. Regulator is a generic linear combat challenge in classic Metroid Prime style. This was also the level I got my face full of Metroid for the first time. You have 10 minutes to make it through the 12 rooms in a holographic arena, something which is framed as Samus training for future missions. There is a boss battle against a holographic Samus at the very end, something seemingly set up as a test for a major part of what the full game would be. Survivor mode is a test of survival. Enemies are thrown at you in a gauntlet and you have to defeat as many enemies as possible before dying. It's a fun-ish mode, but nothing more to it. You can get missiles as an upgrade to help you eliminate the enemies, and the environment is something I don't remember seeing in the full game. The last mode is the Morph Ball challenge, which requires you to collect a bunch of glowing orbs and finish the course. This is another time challenge, but the timer is a bit more strict. The environment is interesting though, as this particular level will make it into the final game as part of one of the major areas in Hunters, as well as a multiplayer arena. First Hunt also features a multiplayer mode, though I never played this particular mode as it requires multiple cartridges. By the time I did get to play the multiplayer mode, it was in the full game. I can't comment much on this mode, but apparently there are 3 multiplayer arenas in the demo: Trooper Module, Assault Cradle and Ancient Vestige. First Hunt, however, doesn't really carry much value these days, and its status as a demo means that if you wanted this kind of action for multiplayer, you're better off getting the next game on the list. However, the single player content in this demo is completely unique and not found in the final game in any way. It was a tech demo in many ways, and the engine created for this demo would eventually be moulded into a fully fledged game a year after. May 2006 arrived, and Metroid Prime Hunters was released. The demo had interested me enough in getting the full game, so I dashed down to my nearest game after school one day to buy the next game we were looking at, Metroid Prime Hunters.
The second Metroid game is in captivity.
As it floats around the arena in order to deplete its health. That was pretty cool. So what's the boss going to be on Vesper Defense Outpost? First Hunt got me interested in getting the full game, and I waited for it to arrive on store shelves. That day arrived in May 2006, and I went and picked up Prime Hunters. Suffice to say the full game is far more fleshed out than the demo, and I can't say for sure whether I necessarily was a big fan of the final product. Initially, yes. As time went on though, and I played more Metroid games, it became clear that Hunters was not exactly the series' finest hour. The graphics were considered extremely impressive for its time, and while I respect that, to me it proved that the DS wasn't very good with realistic graphics. Super Mario 64 DS was a much sharper resolution and ran a lot smoother thanks to its more colourful art style. Textures and Prime Hunters look grainy, and while Mario 64 DS looks better than the original, Prime Hunters feels like it's pushing quite a low limit for how good realistic releases on the DS can look in 3D. That being said, we finally got the gist of what the subtitle Hunters is all about. Set in the Limbic cluster in the Tetra Galaxy, where a telepathic message is sent from the cluster to bounty hunters and other intelligent species, stating the key to the ultimate power resides there. 6 bounty hunters, Camden, Spire, Weevil, Noxus, Silux and Trace, travel to the galaxy in order to obtain this ultimate power. The Federation also received this message and sends Samus around to use, or if this was unavailable, to keep it a secret or to destroy it. She lands on the space station's celestial archives and the game begins. You travel through a linear sequence of rooms and have to find 3 artifacts in order to be able to open the portal to where the Octolith lies. Along the way you encounter one of many hunters who are searching for the ultimate power and have to fight against them. After collecting the 3 artifacts, you teleport to a boss chamber, fight the boss and claim the Octolith. However, when you try to take the Octolith back... Ah yes, the classic Metroid escape sequence. The first time I'd ever experienced this. A frantic dash back through the level to reach your ship. If you remember where to go, it shouldn't be too bad. I'm sure there won't be too many Oh yes, meet the most annoying enemies in the game, the Guardians. These guys jump around the room and bombard you with shots. If you're not on guard, they can really catch you off guard. In my first playthrough of this game, these guys were something of a roadblock. They are so hard to hit, though you can headshot them to get some really major damage in. As the game goes on, you'll find these guys are going to be spawning in quite a lot of places on every planet and space station. But anyway, eventually you can reach your ship and, well, that's the end of the escape sequence. Yeah, these have one of the weaker endings in terms of escape sequences in the Metroid series. Anyway, let's talk about the boss battles in this game, as aside from the hunters you have 8 bosses to fight guarding the 8 Octoliths. You go into the first chamber and a huge tower rises which you have to fight. This is Cretafin, a boss which you have to fight looking down its blue spots before exposing its core, which you pump full of power beam shots and missiles. Over on the planet Alinos, the boss is a giant eye by the name of Slench, which you have first to detach from the wall by shooting the surrounding tentacles, and then hit the centre of its eye as it floats around the arena in order to deplete its health. That was pretty cool. So what's the boss going to be on Vesper Defense Outpost? Oh no! Yes, Metroid Prime Hunters repeats its 2 boss battles for all 8 Octoliths and simply ramping up the difficulty with new attacks and harder patterns. I kind of accepted that was how it was back then, and later that this was just how NSTC did boss battles, considering Mario vs Donkey Kong 2 March of the Minis also only had 2 types of boss battles that it repeated over and over again. But it really isn't great to have all the major bosses in the game just be exactly the same as each other. It gets to the point that there's one Cretafid and one Slench on every planet. Yes, it really is that ridiculous. Samus starts the game with a bunch of her abilities like the Morph Ball, Boost Ball and Missiles, and the only upgrades you get in this game are new weapons. There are 6 new weapons you acquire during the game: the Battle Hammer, Judicator, Volt Driver, Shock Coil, Magmaul and the Imperialists. These 6 weapons are the 6 signature weapons of the other hunters. Weevil uses the Battle Hammer, Noxus uses the Judicator, Camden uses the Volt Driver, Silux uses the Shock Coil, Spire uses the Magmaul, and Trace uses the Imperialists. This ties into the multiplayer mode, which is a big feature of Hunters, designed to show off the DS's online capabilities with a fully featured first-person shooter, lending further credits to the whole Metroid Halo war that was going on during the 2000s. Well, Halo was pretty popular then, no surprise Nintendo would have wanted their own Halo light on the DS. Though in truth, this is more like Quake 3 rather than Halo, and the multiplayer was developed in secret from NSTC bosses, as the Japanese didn't understand first-person shooters, nor liked them as they made them dizzy. Plus, Japan has never been a fan of gratuitous violence, which has hindered the Metroid series over there for many years. The multiplayer was pretty fun. I played both locally and online quite a bit. My favourite hunter to play as was Psylux, who had the shock coil, which could home in on opponents and drain their health. This kind of ties into another problem with the game. The multiplayer character roster is incredibly unbalanced. Psylux and Trace are significantly better than every other hunter. Added to the fact that Prime Hunter's multiplayer used to be played by hackers, whereby they would play as Trace, stand inside walls and snipe you with the Imperialist. You cannot do anything about it and they could just pick you off with the Imperialist. Not to mention the fact that even without hacking, Trace's ability to turn invisible while stood still with the Imperialist is pretty ridiculous, giving you no clue as to where you might be shot from. I get that the sniper rifle is supposed to reward stealthy play, but this is a tad over the top. Apparently this was also due to the Japanese not understanding first-person shooters, so the multiplayer never really went through any balance testing, and since it was on the DS, it was impossible to patch the game for online play, leaving Psylux and Trace as permanent tier 1. Hackers were not really punished for standing inside walls. I would play more games online in the future, and it only furthered my opinions that while online multiplayer helps you play multiplayer modes more often, local multiplayer is still far and away the best form of multiplayer. Admittedly, that could also apply to online multiplayer where you only play with friends, but that kind of gives the same kind of atmosphere as a local multiplayer anyway, especially with modern technologies like Discord that allow you to create the local multiplayer experience while playing online. Anyway, back to the main game. After collecting the 8 octaglyphs and reading a lot of lore, you learn about something called Goria. You then travel back to the planet Alinos and access a new area of the planet to activate the Limbic Cannon and unveil the oubliette where Goria resides. He drains the other 6 hunters of their energy, leaving a final encounter between Samus and Goria. You defeat Goria and... Wait, that was it? If you look through the ending carefully, you can tell this isn't quite how the game is supposed to end, though it took me several years to actually find out that this was even a thing in the game, and that I've been finishing it multiple times with actually truly finishing the game. Though I could see hints in the fact that there was a multiplayer arena that I never unlocked and only ever played online. Said arena had a weapon that I'd never seen before that I kept dying to. Suffice to say, I was woefully unprepared for any matches on this arena, and had no idea where people were even picking up this weapon, as I was unable to practice in the arena. If you've been scanning lore, you will know of an Limbic prophecy. Reading this lore carefully gives you a code. If you shoot the symbols around the arena in the correct order, then defeating Goria changes the ending and goes through to a second phase. A phase I never played on the original cartridge, as I would wound up replaying the game trying to go for 100% and the true ending. Until I came across the piston tunnel! That place killed me over and over again, dang it! Then I lost the cartridge, so I was never able to finish it. This footage you're seeing was recorded on a recent replay of the game after I downloaded the Wii U version to replace the lost cartridge. Prime Hunters was an acceptable first full Metroid game to play, but in comparison to the rest of the series, it's definitely one of the weaker entries as the single player is rather lackluster. The multiplayer was awesome though, and the game was obviously good enough as just a week after acquiring Prime Hunters, I was browsing GameStation with my friends and found another Metroid game pre-owned at a discount price. I decided to buy the game. Little did I know that this game would recontextualise what I saw as a Metroid game into what Metroid games have in fact always been. I bought it because it had a multiplayer mode, and Hunters also had multiplayer. But it would be the single player that would grab me and hook me to the series in the long run. That game was Metroid Prime 2 Echoes.
The third Metroid game is in captivity.
While this game would not be viewed as my favourite among the trilogy in the long run, it was Metroid Prime 2 Echoes that truly cemented Metroid as one of my favourite gaming franchises. Even though I was absolutely hopeless to start with, I got through the mostly linear stretch at the beginning of the temple grounds before being confronted with a crate that I couldn't work out how to open. Turned out all I needed to do was to use a charge shot to open it. Go! Anyway, as it turns out, Prime 2 is directly after Hunters in the Metroid timeline. The story tells of planet Ether, where the Galactic Federation has been investigating space pirate activity. However, the Federation soldiers have gone missing. Samus Aran is sent to investigate, but her ship gets damaged by a storm while entering the planet's atmosphere. Upon touchdown on the planet, something horrifying happens.
What?
What is going on here? As Samus ventures further into the planet, she discovers a mysterious dark portal where she finds a dark version of herself. Surrounded by these dark creatures, the crystal is shattered by this mysterious dark Samus. And Samus is surrounded by the mysterious dark creatures, forced to retreat back through the portal she came through with her equipment stolen by these creatures. Further exploration of the area sees Samus come out above ground and eventually find the Galactic Federation's stranded ship, where she finds out what happened. The Federation's ship was also damaged by the planet's atmosphere while they were trying to chase the space pirates. And while they were trying to repair their ship, they were attacked by these splinters who looked surprisingly similar to the dark creatures Samus saw through the portal. These creatures overwhelmed and killed all the troopers. Further exploration sees Samus find the Great Temple, where after a battle against the Dark Alpha Splinter, a mysterious object fuses with Samus' parasuit. Samus then meets E.M.M.I, who explains everything. Planet Ether was split into two after a meteor struck the planet many years ago, giving birth to a race known as the E.M.M.I. E.M.M.I is a member of the Luminoth race, the resident race of planet Ether, who have fought a war against the E.M.M.I for years and found themselves on the losing side. With their civilization in ruins, the Luminoth sealed themselves away, with E.M.M.I the one staying in the Great Temple. The object Samus obtained was the energy transfer module, which the E.M.M.I have used to take the energy from 3 temples across Ether and put them into their dark counterparts, leaving the Great Temple's energy the last one remaining. If the E.M.M.I were to take the Great Temple's energy, planet Ether would collapse. But since Samus has now acquired the energy transfer module, she can help save planet Ether and the Luminoth. Samus is therefore tasked with travelling to Dark Ether and recovering all the stolen energy, as well as her stolen equipment. And so begins Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. This is one of the hardest games in the Metroid franchise, mostly in terms of the boss battles. Bosses like the Boost Guardian, the Alpha Blog and the Spider Guardian are notoriously difficult to beat in your first playthrough. So much so that when the game was ported to Wii in the Metroid Prime trilogy, they lowered the difficulty of these particular boss battles, especially as Retro Studios themselves couldn't actually beat the Boost Guardian without going into debug mode. Prime 2's progression method is quite straightforward. There are 3 major areas you have to travel in the game: Aegon Waste, Torvus Bog and Sanctuary Fortress. In each area, you have to acquire 3 temple keys in order to be able to access the Dark Temple in the Dark Ether equivalent of each area: Dark Aegon Waste, Dark Torvus Bog and Ing Hive. Oh yeah, probably should talk about that. Taking cues from The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes uses a light world, dark world mechanic, where the world map has 2 different versions with slight differences in how you can travel through each of them. Though, while the only major difference with this Link to the Past Dark World was that you would transform into a rabbit unless you had the moon pole, Prime 2's Dark World had a far more sinister twist. Dark Ether's atmosphere is poisonous, and you take constant damage by standing in it, with light zones the only safe zones that you can stand in to recover health. This can lead into standing in these zones for an extended period of time in order to recover all your health, though over multiple playthroughs I've found that you can rush through each one and manage your health a bit more before you get it all back at the next save point. It's a bit of a risk-reward system in many ways, and you can reduce the damage you take during the game to the point where you eventually take no damage in Dark Ether's atmosphere, though that's a late game reward. After finding these keys, which also require you to find other power-ups in order to access them, you gain access to the Dark Temple and have to fight a boss battle. After defeating the boss, Samus has to take the energy from the planet and return it to its light counterpart. You also notice that the sky changes to a red colour from a purple colour. The planet is starting to show its cracks. You repeat this process twice over until the end of the game. I mentioned before how this game showed me what the Metroid franchise really was, and the most notable thing that there was a lock-on mechanic. It was clear just from this that the series wasn't really a shooter series as much as it was actually closer to Zelda in terms of exploration. In short, this was a first-person adventure game, with power-ups to collect allowing access to new areas. Though Metroid noticeably had a lot more backtracking than Zelda and a focus on winding corridors that transformed the linear pathways into an open explorable area. This kind of level design would later go on to become some of my favourites in video games. What Metroid noticeably does is tease you with power-ups like energy tanks and missile expansions that you simply can't obtain yet as you lack the required power-up. Coming back later when you have the acquired power-up allows you to obtain that item. This game really encourages you to remember its layout and take note of particular areas. The upgrades you obtain in this game are varied as your standard power beam and missiles are added to with a light and dark beam. These beams were considered controversial for using ammo, but coming off hunters it didn't seem like such a big issue. Plus, using each of them gives ammo for the other, playing with the whole light versus dark theme that permeates throughout this game, so it's not too bad. The beams also can affect the crystals that you use in the dark world to keep you safe. The dark beam disables the crystals while the light beam enhances them and causes instant death to the Ing if they are in the expanded area. Towards the end of the game, you get the Annihilator beam, which infuses crystals with both light and dark energy, forcing the Ing to travel towards the field where they meet certain doom. But what happens if two Ing try to run alongside each other to the area? Anyway, let's talk about this game's difficulty, because it is definitely one of the hardest games in the Metroid series. Part of that, however, is down to the placement of save points. On 2 occasions you are presented with a save point that requires you to traverse a large section of the following area and defeat a boss battle before you are allowed to get back anywhere near it with a corresponding upgrade. There is nothing too wrong with limiting the save points in a game where exploration and routes wrapping around to previous areas is a thing, but it gets to the point where in Torvus Bog, if you open the lower area of Hydro Dynamo Station, you can't get back until you obtain the gravity boost. But what's this? The Alpha Blog is in your way, one of the hardest bosses in the game. Later on in Sanctuary Fortress, you have to sit through the Luminoth tail every single time if you die to the subsequent boss battle, the Spider Guardian. An innovative boss battle that gave many people problems, myself included. But we can't really talk about difficulty without mentioning the Boost Guardian. This boss battle is infamous. The area you are in has no safe zones and it's in the dark world, so your health is constantly draining. This is the first boss battle where this is a thing, and at this point in the game your energy is going to be somewhat limited, so it's more of an issue than it is later in the game. As if that wasn't enough, attacking the Boost Guardian causes him to transform into a ball attack that zooms around the arena, does massive damage upon hit, and is extremely difficult to avoid. This type of boss battle would cause problems for me later down the line too. He doesn't break out of this form until you use Morph Ball bombs, so naturally you're going to stay in Morph Ball mode until you can bomb it out. But it's harder to dodge when you're in Morph Ball mode. Many people therefore take massive damage from his boosting attacks, and this adds up with constantly draining health in the arena. This was the boss that was nerfed in the trilogy version.
We looked at a few of the bosses and made small refinements to those encounters.
After restoring all the energy to the 3 Light Ether Temples, there is one more area you need to travel to, the Sky Temple. In order to get there, Samus needs to acquire 9 Sky Temple keys, scattered across Dark Ether. These keys are all in previously revisited areas. Collecting them all grants access to the Sky Temple, where the leader of the Ing resides. Samus confronts and defeats the leader of the Ing in an epic final encounter. The battle's pretty difficult, but it's one of my favourite final encounters in all of gaming. Or is it the final encounter? See, during the game, Samus has come face to face with her dark doppelganger Dark Samus on multiple occasions. The two fought in Aegon Waste, and again at the very top of Sanctuary Fortress, with Samus coming out on top both times. Upon collecting the energy from the Sky Temple, Dark Ether starts to collapse. it's time for a classic Metroid escape sequence. Except on her way back, Samus encounters Dark Samus, who looks a bit different. The ruse is uncovered, and Dark Samus' true identity is revealed. Though at this point I hadn't played the original Prime, so the true identity of Dark Samus was lost on me. Anyway, after a long fight, you eventually defeat Dark Samus, who tries to reach out for Samus as it disappears. Samus then escapes through a portal to Aether as the E.M.M.I are trying to make a desperate escape, but the portal closes just as the E.M.M.I are making their big getaway. In a very powerful ending scene, the Luminoth appear to thank Samus for saving their entire civilization, as Samus walks off into the light, waving goodbye. Quite some everyday job. Come to the planet to investigate what happens to the Federation, leave having saved an entire alien civilization from certain doom. The game's multiplayer mode was also played a fair bit with friends back in the day, but it was definitely inferior to Hunters, mainly because the lock-on kind of detracts from the multiplayer aspect of the series. Perhaps not surprising that Metroid will not feature competitive multiplayer again, though it wouldn't be the last time it would have multiplayer in it. We'll get to that one later. While 2006 was the year where I started to get into Metroid a bit more, it was still through the purchases of games with a social aspect to them. It wasn't until 2007 that I really got into the series, with the release of the next major Metroid game to be released, Metroid Prime 3 Corruption.
The fourth Metroid game is in captivity.
With Prime 2 finished, I took a bit of a break from Metroid for a while, but during 2007 I knew Metroid Prime 3 was one of the games I was looking forward to. I liked Prime 2 a lot when playing it, so I was definitely looking forward to Prime 3 coming out, but now I was actively using the internet and going on forums quite a bit more. Prime 3 would prove to be the catalyst by which I would really get into Metroid, as around the same time as I played the game, I discovered the Metroid fan site Metroid Recon. This site cranked up my Metroid interest significantly, and a few weeks after Prime 3 I signed up to their forums. Yes, Metroid Recon a long time ago used to have a forum. It stopped a long time ago, and unfortunately I was partly responsible for the closure of the forums after I posted a bit too much alongside another user. The admin deemed it too unhealthy and eventually closed the forums. The other guy turned out to be a bit of a nasty piece of work, but putting on an appearance on forums is rather easy. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here. Let's talk about Prime 3. The game starts with Samus having a dream of Dark Samus' resurrection. Sporting a fancy new ship, Samus flies to the GFS Olympus after being called for a mission by the Galactic Federation. Alongside 3 other hunters, Rundus, Gandrader and Gore, she is tasked with investigating a logic virus injected by space pirates into the Galactic Federation's Aurora units. However, there is no time to waste as the pirates attack after warping out of a wormhole. After a frantic sequence of action scenes where the 3 hunters assist Samus on the planet Norion, a phasing meteor is set to crash into the planet. Samus frantically races to get the generator back online, and after an epic fight against Metal Ridley, she and the other hunters arrive at the main tower. However, Dark Samus shows up and completely annihilates everyone. Samus wakes up a year later, now corrupted with Phazon and equipped with a new PED suit. Tasked with trying to find the missing hunters and save other planets from the corruption caused by other Phazon meteors. And so begins Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. This is the second Metroid game to feature an expanded cast of hunters alongside Samus after Metroid Prime Hunters. These guys are much cooler than Hunters cast. Well, maybe aside from Gore. Sorry Gore fans. Runders is my favourite of the bunch, and they're all brought to life thanks to a first for the Metroid franchise, voice acting. Every major character, apart from Samus, talks in this game, and I think that was a better approach than some games later in the series.
The baby, and the baby, or the baby, of the baby, or the baby. Babies cry, the babies cry.
Prime 3's most notable feature is its motion controls. Since this is a Wii game, the potential for Wii games to feature pointer controls for first-person shooters and create a new standard for first-person shooters was always... But while some games experimented with this, like Call of Duty 3, it was Metroid Prime 3 which perfected this idea and brought it out to full fruition. Prime 3's controls are excellent when you're pointing and shooting. Since Retro's aim for the Prime series was to put you behind the helmet of Samus Aran, this game attempts to ramp up that immersion even further. To Due to how you're aiming in this game, Retro included a number of sections where you have to physically grab objects and move them. This part has retroactively been controversial, as it essentially becomes gimmicky motion controls. Pull! Twist! Push! 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 Aside from that, the most notable thing that Prime 3 has is another thing that Hunters did: multiple planets. Only this time, instead of having one landing point on every planet, Prime 3's planets are much bigger and have multiple ship landing points, creating a new pseudo kind of interconnectivity. These environments are much better than Hunters 2, feeling like mini interconnected Metroid maps, though in some cases the environments are a bit spaced out from each other. Prime 3 still features that same kind of creative puzzles that the series has previously done, and there's one particular quest that you really have to know how the map fits together in order to obtain the prize. The ship plays a much larger role in this game thanks to a few new upgrades like the command visor, which you can use to control your ship. The ship does get upgraded later on in the game with the ship missiles, which become the most pointless expansion pickup in the game, and the ship grapple beam, which is used to lift pieces of a bomb on the Skytown as well as lift other large objects. The environments are really good. Brio tells us of a story of magic versus science and how it doomed an entire civilization. Elysia has ties to the Chozo, and Skytown is a beautiful environment with these cool rails that you grapple beam across that are rather reminiscent of Bioshock Infinite. Prime 3 also allows you to travel to the Space Pirates homeworld for the first time in the series. Oh yeah, I've been mentioning these games' storylines, but I forgot to include one notable feature that all the Prime games have, including Hunters. I touched on it in that game, but the scan visor is a major feature of the Metroid games. The Prime series was one of the first games in the series to hide its backstory for the player to discover. You can go throughout these games without really knowing about the backstory, but the scan visor allows you to gain valuable insight into what happened, and this is how I've been able to give the backstory behind these games in this video. The boss battles aren't quite as notorious as Prime 2, though some of the bosses on Brio were particularly tough in the first playthrough, like the Korak Beast. Moganar is a boss I've constantly struggled on, and constantly find a way to lose to every playthrough, and that's the first phase on the Seed boss. They tend to get easier as the game goes along. The game noticeably has a lot more Halo-like moments than previous Metroid games, with a lot of set pieces like defending a bomb that you're going to drop on a Seed as on Elysia, as well as helping the Galactic Federation with a full-scale invasion of the pirate homeworld. This is split opinion among players, but I feel like it helps to further the excitement in the game. Plus, it can lead to some pretty silly AI behaviours if you end the mission in a certain way. It just jumps off the edge! But now I must actually talk about one of the major parts of the game which I somehow haven't talked about yet. The game has corruption in it, and this ties into the gameplay. Prime 3 has Hyper Mode, which allows you to pay an entire energy tank for a temporary power boost to be able to kill enemies. Except if you hold off for a bit, you trigger Corrupt Hyper Mode, where you can keep yourself in this mode for an extended state. So long as you don't over-corrupt and get an instant game over, then you should be fine. Okay, I think you can see the problem here. Having to pay a considerable amount of life seems like a big cost, but it isn't actually. So long as you can keep yourself alive, the trade-off is completely worth it, as enemies have a large amount of health and soak up hits from your power beam, but the phasing beam easily dispatches these enemies. Hyper Mode is also required in order to defeat certain enemies. I used to be very conservative regarding Hyper Mode, but when I replayed the game for the channel last year, I was almost the complete opposite. I put it down to trading card games teaching me on how to use life as a resource. But yeah, Hyper Mode kind of invalidates a lot of the later beam weapons you get, just because the phasing weaponry is something you get earlier in the game and constantly remains the best in the game throughout. As Samus progresses, she gets further corrupted. All the hunters have had their will corrupted by Dark Samus, and only Samus is resisting this corruption. She is forced to fight all the hunters who have helped her on planet Norion. Eventually, she discovers the source of all phasing, Planet Phase, and and the planet's atmosphere corrupts her to the point that her gunship no longer recognises her as Samus. She further descends into the planet and eventually confronts Dark Samus in what would be the final chapter of the Prime saga, at least back in 2007. We know we're getting a 4th entry from somewhere now. The final fight against Dark Samus is pretty difficult as the patterns get overwhelming and the energy you've collected during the game is changed to leave you in permanent hyper mode. After the battle, complete with a remix of the theme from Prime 2, Dark Samus reveals that the stolen Aurora Unit 313 is on phase. You see, the missing GFS Valhalla shows up about halfway through the game, and it's this location when you discover what really happened to the missing Aurora Unit. This leads us to finding the location of phase. In order to get through this location, Samus must find energy cells on the other planets. This game's equivalent is the Sky Temple keys. The energy cell quest is the best kind of these quests though, as you don't need every energy cell in order to finish the Valhalla unless you go in the wrong direction. Though that doesn't matter too much if you're going for 100%. Anyway, the Aurora Unit battle is long, and this is how the Prime trilogy ends. Somewhat disappointingly, with it basically Theo gets a giant head, but as we will see later on in this video, this kind of thing is par for the course with Metroid for the final battle. Prime 3 Corruption is a great Metroid game though. I think it's probably the weakest of the Prime trilogy. It's still a great game, and this combined with finding Metroid Recon really kicked off my Metroid interest into overdrive and turned me into a massive fan of the series. I found myself watching a lot of Metroid videos on YouTube around this time, and earlier in the year had got Super Smash Bros. Melee with the intent to try and play Samus, but found myself mainly a different character in the end. But at this point, though I was also playing stuff like The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass and Super Mario Galaxy, most of the games I wanted to try and play were Metroid games. I played Hunters, Prime 2 and Prime 3, but there was one notable exclusion from these, which I hadn't played yet: the original Metroid Prime.
The 5th Metroid game is in captivity.
Metroid Prime is my 3rd favourite game of all time. I'm not sure what I can really say about it that hasn't already been said before, so to copy the segment from my top 10 games of all time video to explain why I love this game so much. A game that slowly eases you in with an action-packed opening. It starts with Samus travelling to the space pirate frigate Orpheon. After infiltrating the frigate, Samus fights and defeats the parasite queen, the result of which causes the ship to self-destruct. After a frantic escape sequence, Samus discovers that Ridley is alive again, now cybernetically enhanced as Meta Ridley. During the escape sequence, sparks from the exploding ship strip Samus of all her abilities, and as she exits the frigate, she sees Ridley flying down to the nearby planet. Samus gives chase, and then the real game begins. Planet Talon 4 is an expansive, interconnected planet with a tragic past. Several years ago, a meteorite fell from the stars and infected the inhabitants with a deadly poison. The Chozo, who were living on the planet, were all wiped out in the process, and only the local wildlife remains. By scanning the walls of the Chozo ruins, you learn about this deadly poison that infected the planet. You see the poisonous water everywhere, and naturally you think this is what killed the local wildlife. You then defeat the source of the poisonous water, Flaga, only to find out that the poison that killed the Chozo was something far deadlier. A mysterious substance known as Phazon, a very mutagenetic substance. It soon transpires just why the space pirates are on this planet as you continue to explore it until you eventually get to the very heart of the operation and discover the substance itself. There, in the Phazon mines, the true extent of the space pirates' goals are made clear. They want to use Phazon as a new power source to create elite pirates. Space pirates enhanced with the power of Phazon. Along the way, in an ingenious bit of world design, you have to travel through the very ship you started the game in, now integrated into the environment and underwater. The planet Talon 4 has great 3D interconnected level design, the game's soundtrack is fantastic, and the story, should you choose to pursue it, lays the groundwork for the games to follow. While its sequels Metroid Prime 2 and Metroid Prime 3 improve some aspects of the game like the scan visor, which isn't as intuitive in Metroid Prime, and are fantastic games in their own right, those games also lost something that the original Metroid Prime had. What a first game for Retro Studios to develop. Metroid Prime is truly an incredible game, and for a while I was debating whether this was my favourite game of all time. Now you must be thinking something's off right now. If Prime is my favourite of the games, then how come it's the last one I played? Surely everything I like about these games should have come from Prime 2? Well, I came to this decision sometime later. I just feel overall Prime does this formula better than its sequels do, and this is why this game is my favourite of the franchise. What really set the tone for this game was the fact that the game started off with an opening piece of narration.
The cosmos. In the vast universe, the history of humanity is but a flash of light from a lone star. The life of a single person should be lost in space and time. But among the stars, there is one light that burns brighter than all others. The light of Samus Aran. Her battles extend beyond her life and etch themselves into history. Here, another chapter of that history will be written.
I later found out that this narration wasn't actually in the NSTC version of the game, and that as a result, there were many people who wouldn't be aware that such a thing was even in Metroid Prime. As a result, in early 2009, I decided to upload the video Metroid Prime Our Narrator Pal in order to demonstrate the addition of the narrator. Then Metroid Prime Trilogy got announced and added the PAL changes into the NSTC version. Something tells me this was supposed to be in there anyway. A lot of people want Metroid Prime Trilogy on Switch, so here you go. After exploring the Phazon mines and defeating the Omega Pirates, Samus has to collect 12 artifacts in order to unlock the Impact Crater. But having got involved in the quest to try and rid Talon 4 of the corruption seeped in by Metroid Prime, she forgot why she came to Talon 4 in the first place. And then it happens. Yep, that's right, it's Ridley time. The fight against Ridley is long, hard and very tough, but extremely satisfying once you finally defeat him and see that epic ending to the fight. I've basically covered the endgame of the game at this point, but in case you aren't aware, Metroid Prime is the origin and point of Dark Samus. When Samus confronts Metroid Prime in the final battle, Prime eventually steals Samus's phaser suit at the end of the game. The Impact Crater soon collapses, but not before Samus makes a daring getaway. Samus stands there watching the Impact Crater Chozo Artifact Temple explode and makes off, having finally eliminated the parasite from Talon 4.
Chozo's faith in Samus has been well rewarded, and now a new star shines in the universe. The bounty hunter, Samus Aran. What future and fate await her?
Yeah, when this game came out, they hadn't fully established what Samus looked like underneath the parasuit. And so ends Metroid Prime, but not before the post-credits scene teasing Metroid Prime 2 and Dark Samus. Of course, this game was just part of a marathon of Metroid games I was buying during this period. I'd only ever played the 3D games so far, but it was time to jump into the 2D realm with Metroid Zero Mission.
The sixth Metroid game is in captivity.
Metroid Zero Mission is a remake of the original Metroid game and improves the experience drastically. This becomes even more apparent when you unlock the original Metroid later on, but enough about that. The premise of this game is very simple. Space pirates have stolen samples of Metroids from the Galactic Federation, with plans to replicate them using beta rays and use them as a biological weapon. The Federation attacks, but the pirates repel them, so the Federation sends Samus to do the work instead. This is starting to sound very familiar now. Samus infiltrates planet Zebes and uses clues from the Chozo to locate powerful equipment that allows her to progress further into the planet. Following these clues eventually takes her to Crateria at the planet's surface, where she requires a mysterious unknown item. Further exploration uncovers the power grip, which allows Samus to access the ice beam, and then is able to make progress in Kraid's lair to eventually find and defeat Kraid. Along the way, Samus encounters multiple boss battles that act as mini tests, some of which show up over and over again if she doesn't defeat them in time. Further exploration of Norfair after beating Kraid uncovers a series of boss battles where you first fight a couple of Kirigiru in differing circumstances. But as it develops, one of them matures into an imago, and the boss battle becomes crazy. Defeating it allows access to Ridley's hideout, and eventually Samus's first major encounter with a big dragon. Kind of. You see, it was around this time that Samus's backstory was being fleshed out, and a Metroid manga was commissioned to establish Samus's origin story. She was raised on the human colony K2L when space pirates attacked, led by Ridley, who proceeded to kill Samus' parents. This plants a rivalry between the two at an early age, especially after the orphan Samus is taken in by the Chozo, who train her in the art of combat, eventually using their highly advanced technology to create the famous parasuit we all recognise today. Also, fun fact, Samus' surname Aran comes from the famous football player Pele, whose full name was Edson Arantes do Nascimento. Pro Evolution Metroid when? Samus confronts and defeats Ridley, finally avenging her parents' death, and I'm sure she won't have to ever face him again. Okay, given we already covered the Prime games, you know that's not happening. So, with Ridley defeated, Samus escapes his hideout and acquires a screw attack, using it to make rapid progress back to Brinstar. With Kraid and Ridley defeated, Samus is able to access Torium, coming face to face with the Metroids. Further progress into the base reveals the space pirates leader of this operation, Mother Brain. It's time! Mother Brain fires loads of spaghetti hoops at Samus, but she really isn't in the mood for pasta, and breaks Mother Brain's tank, destroying her. Destroying Mother Brain starts an escape sequence as Samus climbs a long shaft, making it back to Crateria and entering her ship, escaping the planet. Another mission complete. Nope, there's still more game to go. In a big plot twist, in Zero Mission, Samus' ship is shot down by space pirates. She is stranded on Zebes without her parachute, due to having taken off in the ship. Whoops! Samus must now infiltrate the space pirate mothership in Chozodia, where the game becomes all Metal Gear Solid. This extended stealth section leaves you feeling powerless, and it's pretty lengthy. After multiple playthroughs of this game, I knew where to hide and how to avoid the space pirates, but it's pretty bad if you get caught. Without her suit, Samus takes a lot of damage and can only stun the pirates. Eventually, Samus leaves the mothership and enters some Chozo ruins, but the pirates are out in force here too. Making her way past all the space pirates, Samus eventually comes across an old Chozo wall carving, where she is reminded of her childhood being raised on Zebes by the Chozo. The painting turns into a hologram and offers Samus a test. She must shoot the hologram when it isn't showing her in order to slot 4 orbs into the wall. Doing so gives Samus her parasuit back, as well as enabling all of the unknown items collected throughout the game. The following segment is so satisfying. You proceed to run back through where you came and completely annihilate the space pirates with a plasma beam. Samus is at max power at this point. This is also the point of the game where you can go back to previous areas in order to get all the items, but not before getting the final upgrade, Power Bombs. Power Bombs are needed to access the game's real final boss, Mecha Ridley. Everyone calls this thing one of the easiest final bosses in Metroid history, and while I can understand that sentiment, for me this fight was always very difficult. The thing is, you're confined to a very small space and you have to jump at precisely the right height and shoot missiles at Mecha Ridley in order to defeat him. The technique is something I found difficult, and as a result it took many tries, especially on hard mode. Eventually, however, he was defeated and another escape sequence starts. This one is a bit more complex due to the route you have to take, but eventually Samus finds a space pirate escape pod and battles 2 particularly tough space pirates before escaping planet Zebes in the pod. And so ends Metroid Zero Mission. For the longest period of time, this was the only 2D Metroid I played, but I definitely enjoyed it even though it requires a different skill set than the 3D games. Wall jumping and getting the timing on these was particularly difficult, as was that one upgrade that requires you to be perfect with your shine sparking when I was going for 100%. That one took forever. Zero Mission also has multiple images for its endings, which encourage repeat playthroughs. So unsurprisingly, given it's also quite short, I've replayed this game many times trying to get the different images. But another unlockable for this game was the original Metroid.
The 7th Metroid game is in captivity.
In contrast to Zero Mission, I never got very far in the original Metroid. I got a few upgrades, but I don't think I ever got as far as Kraid. The map is a lot more confusing, has less direction to it than Zero Mission, so it is very easy to get lost in this game. It just goes to show how much Zero Mission improved on the original game and made it much more playable. Zero Mission, along with Fusion, have arguably the most refined control system that Metroid has ever had. Samus's jumps are pretty heavy, and using the R button to switch between beam and missiles just feels right rather than the cumbersome method that a later game in this video has. We'll get to that one later. I don't think I really have much to say about the original Metroid. Everything that I covered about the game was basically done in Zero Mission, so let's move on to the game as we enter the spin-off territory in Metroid Prime Pinball.
The 8th Metroid game is in captivity.
So I like pinball games, or at least there are two very specific pinball games that I loved as a kid. Pokemon Pinball and its sequel Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire. Pokemon Pinball 3 was something I wanted for ages, but this did provide the motivation to get Metroid Prime Pinball, another pinball game which makes perfect sense given that Samus's alternate transformation is, you know, a ball. Truth to be told, Prime Pinball is pretty limited in what you can actually do and doesn't have Pokemon Pinball's hook that gave it a long lifespan in filling the Pokédex. But Prime Pinball does a good job at recreating Metroid Prime in pinball form. There are boards based on the Space Pirate Frigate, Fendrana Drifts, Talon Overworld, Phazon Mines, Artifact Temple and Impact Crater. Pirate Frigate and Talon Overworld are the main two boards, while the others exist as boss battles, which are also the bosses from Metroid Prime. There is also Magmore Caverns, but that is multiplayer only. Yes, this game is multiplayer. I don't think I ever really had a chance to play it much though, and eventually I lost the cartridge along with Hunters, so I only have the box now. Sad times really. Oh yeah, the acquisition of Prime 3, Prime, Zero Mission and Prime Pinball all came in the span of just 4 months. It was pretty much a full-on Metroid obsession by this point. So, surprisingly, it would take another 2 years before I played another Metroid game. Going into 2009, I finally had access to the Wii Shop channel and the Virtual Console service, and within the next year or so, I would finally play the game that many hold up as the perennial Metroid, Super Metroid.
The 9th Metroid game is in captivity.
It would be a bit of time before I was able to play another Metroid game, but having played Zero Mission, it did make me wonder what a Metroid 2 remake would be like. Then I began to see posts on Metroid Recon on such a project, a fan project that had extensive detailed plans to remake Metroid 2 in the same style as Zero Mission, complete with early videos for this as well as development footage. You may have heard of this game, it is now the very well known AM2R. But enough about that one for now. I'm sure you don't need much introduction to Super Metroid, as it is one of those all-time classics that has endured to this day. But just in case you haven't, the Metroid race has been wiped out, save for one baby Metroid. We'll talk about the events of that game later. For now, a distress signal comes from a space station near Zebes. Samus flies to the station, where the baby Metroid has been kept, only to find, yes, you guessed it, Ridley. Samus fights Ridley but is unable to defeat him before he escapes with the baby Metroid. The space station then starts to self-destruct, which Samus must escape the ship and take refuge on planet Zebes. Wait a minute, Metroid Prime had a very similar opening to this game. Super Metroid does its own thing though. The opening is legendary. You arrive at Zebes and it is completely barren. You don't think anything is here, and you make your way to Brinstar to collect the Morph Ball. Then a security camera activates. It turns out the space pirates are still here. And this is just the beginning of the many twists and turns that the game provides. Many of the boss fights are legendary in this game. From the towering encounter against Kraid, the fight against Trockmire, which surely has to be the most gruesome in any Nintendo game, and of course the legendary final boss battle, which isn't so much of a challenge as it is a spectacle. Not that I ever got that far on my initial playthrough. I played most of the game and got as far as Lower Norfair, but as I ventured down to Ridley, I found myself extremely low health after a sequence where I had to escape rising lava. Saving at the save points do not restore all of your health. As a result, I was stuck on low health and struggled against the two space pirates who took quite the amount of hits in the lead up to the fight against Ridley. As a result, I put the game down for many years and only came back to it years later when I finally realised I could solve my health problem by backtracking and finding a nearby hidden energy tank. That single-handedly solved the problem, and I went on to get 100% of the game and finish it. For the record, I saved the animals. If any game put Metroid on the map, then Super Metroid surely is it. It stands the test of time very well, and the foresight to include customizable controls really helped, as I played the game on a virtual console with a GameCube controller. If anyone has any experience of trying that, you know how incredibly awkward that is, because the buttons from the SNES directly translate to the buttons on the GameCube controller. But the different layouts of these, combined with the fact that a lot of games use the B button to jump, like the Donkey Kong Country games, which combined with the Y button makes these games practically impossible to play on a GameCube controller. Super Metroid was the only SNES game that I could actually play on a GameCube controller thanks to customization, so that's a nice bonus. Super Metroid held my attention until the moment it didn't. But around the same time, a new Metroid game was coming out, one that was looking to reinvent Metroid in 3D, delivering the kind of fast-paced action that you get in the 2D games into 3D. I was really excited for this game. The trailers looked extremely promising and the reviews were looking good at the time. Little did I know how infamous this game would become in gaming culture in the coming years. Yes, that's right, the game I'm referring to is Metroid Other M.
The 10th Metroid game is in captivity.
From the most celebrated game in the Metroid franchise to its most derided, Metroid Other M is widely considered to be the worst Metroid game ever made, and the one that severely damaged the reputation of the Metroid franchise for years. Why then did I decide to buy it at the time? Oh, that'll be why. Let it be known that buying games based on review scores is always a risk. Metroid Other M takes place directly after Super Metroid and shows the ending to Super Metroid in this gorgeous cinematic. Then it immediately loses much of its credibility as the voice acting comes into play and Samus is voiced for the first time in the series.
I awoke to the familiar voice of a quarantine officer. A dream. I had been reliving the tragic moments of my recent past. Thanks to the hyper beam, which was given to me somehow by the baby, along with the remains of Mother Brain, the space pirates, and my long-standing nemesis, Ridley.
Henshin.
The baby.
Metroid Other M's storyline is infamously terrible. The voice acting is not very good, and ultimately the fact that the story is so tied into the gameplay causes huge problems. The game's premise is that Samus is investigating the bottle ship after picking up a distress signal codenamed Baby's Cry. There she meets her former commanding officer from the Galactic Federation days, Adam Malkovich, along with a bunch of old Galactic Federation soldiers like Anthony Higgs. Remember him? No?
The baby.
Anyway, Samus helps to investigate the goings on at the bottle ship and eventually encounters this mysterious, cute looking creature. What is this thing? Well, the truth may be hard to cope with. As the game progresses, it turns out that this creature is in fact Ridley. When this is eventually revealed, the one moment in the entire game that this game is known for occurs. The most criticised part of the game by far, the moment where it shows Samus afraid of Ridley. This caused a huge outcry on the internet, with many people pointing out by this point in the series that Samus has defeated Ridley multiple times and shouldn't be afraid of him.
The baby.
So yeah, that's Metroid Other M, which is considered to be a bad game by many people. While the story does detract significantly from the game, I still very much enjoy what I played in spite of the story issues and the severe lack of an actual soundtrack in this game. I can see the potential in the game style, a 3D Metroid game with the mechanics of 2D and the implementation of a speed booster. It could have been something with potential, but unfortunately this game is extremely linear with literally no way to be able to sequence break it. And the heavy use of invisible walls on certain segments mean a lot of effort was implemented to keep the player on track. This pretty much meant that speedrunners gave up on even trying to speedrun this game when it came out. I remember reading the Speed Demos archive forums at the time, and their efforts to try and find ways to speedrun the game were met with constant dead ends, and the community there had a general apathy for the game as a whole. That and the fact that save point doors are locked until you've saved the game, making a true speedrun impossible.
The baby.
Part of the problem with this game is that you do not collect power-ups in a traditional way. Instead, Samus comes with a fully powered up suit, but she disables a lot of functionality for story reasons and only uses it when A.M.M.I authorises it. This gets to ridiculous levels when A.M.M.I orders Samus to activate the various suits in Sector 3 only after she's been burned alive for an extensive period of the game. This section of the game is commonly referred to as the Hell Run. As the game progresses, you get authorised to use more and more upgrades, but with the progression of the story, there does come a moment where Samus takes things into her own hands to activate the screw attack in order to reach a secret portion of the bottle ship. There she discovers the remains of the last Metroid have been used to create more Metroids. The scientists on the ship were also looking to create a new mother brain, known as M.B, to control this new Metroid network. This information comes from a woman named Madeline Bergman. A.M.M.I informs Samus that these Metroids cannot be frozen. Due to the dangerous nature of the sector, A.M.M.I decides to sacrifice himself to destroy Sector 0 and prevent the Metroids from coming back. Samus is given a room to go to in order to find a survivor.
The baby.
During the course of the game, it is revealed that one of the soldiers is working against Samus and the Federation, nicknamed the Deleter. This factor is played up really highly during the course of this game, before being ended suddenly by killing the character off screen, and you only really learn his identity by looking up on the internet. I am serious about this. It's James Pearce, by the way. It is eventually revealed that Madeline Bergman is in fact the aforementioned M.B, and the real Madeline Bergman is hidden, revealed to be the survivor mentioned by A.M.M.I. Betrayed by the scientists and Madeline, M.B telepathically commanded the Space Pirate Special Forces to attack those on board and had managed to propagate the Metroids in Sector 0. Samus and Madeline are then confronted by M.B herself. A group of Federation troopers rushes into the room and M.B summons the bottle ship's most dangerous creatures to attack. Madeline stops M.B, who is then killed by Federation soldiers. The Colonel compliments Samus' efforts, but orders the soldier to escort Samus back to her ship. The soldier reveals himself as Anthony, the only surviving member of the 7th Platoon. Samus, Madeline and Anthony leave for the Galactic Federation headquarters in Samus' gunship.
The baby.
So yeah, Other M's story is riddled with problems. Or is it? Well yes, in English. It has been well documented that Sakamoto was in charge of the English localization for the game, which has caused a few problems. Sakamoto is known to have a very strong, distinctive vision on how his games play out, and by targeting him with a localization, a lot of intent is lost, and this is purely because he is Japanese. You see, the Japanese language has several words for what we in English would just use as just one word. The difference being that each word is supposed to express intent. A great deal of nuance is involved. Japan also infamously uses a lot of English, which is probably where names like Bottle Ship and Baby's Cry come from. The names were supposed to be distinct and different to what the name actually means in English. Localizers have found creative ways to get around this facet of the Japanese language when localizing games and anime into English, but putting the guy who wrote the script in Japanese in charge of his own localization because there was a very specific message he wanted to convey, yeah, that unfortunately was always going to end in disaster. There's a video by Lexicon Lookout called The Other M That Never Was that goes into this subject in a lot better detail than I ever could, and I highly suggest you check out this video to see just how much was lost in translation and how much of the meaning behind the story was lost. Of course, this still doesn't mean that it was a good storyline, and the general negative feedback from this game, a game Sakamoto put so much work into, was enough to put him off the series for many years. It feels like Metroid Other M was trying to be the Metal Gear Solid in its presentation.
Samus, what's going on? Respond! Respond!
The baby.
And the whole games as a movie idea. But while Hideo Kojima's games have enough innovative ideas, as well as being strong examples of games as an art and using games as a means to progress the medium as a whole, Metroid Other M's lack of that, as well as a heavy dose of abstractness, just didn't work at all and backfired spectacularly. When you're too abstract, it just makes zero sense. The Metroid series would have started an extended hiatus from this point onwards, but there are still some Metroid games I hadn't got around to yet. One of them I got to play when I got a 3DS and had access to another game, Metroid 2, Return of Samus.
The 11th Metroid game is in captivity.
Some time after the Prime series, the Galactic Federation decides that the Metroid species cannot continue to exist, and orders for a full-scale genocide of the Metroid species on planet SR-388. The Galactic Federation tries this first, but it's the Galactic Federation. We all know how this goes at this point. Samus is therefore called by the Federation to do the job for them. And so begins Metroid 2, Return of Samus. This game introduced a fair amount to the series, including save points and the spider ball, but it was noticeably a lot more linear than its predecessor, or its successor Super Metroid. You kill a bunch of Metroids, move on to the next room, rinse and repeat. Unlike the original Metroid, I did see this one through to completion and see the game's greatest moment. After defeating the Metroid Queen, who coincidentally is also the final boss in Other M, Samus encounters a baby Metroid who sees her as its mother.
The baby.
She decides to spare this baby Metroid and takes it back with her to the Federation, setting up the events of Super Metroid. I am breezing through this one as I don't have too much to say on Metroid 2 because it is relatively basic, though it does a lot for a game and has this excellent eerie atmosphere to it. That being said, you could tell that although it as a game had a very distinct vision to it, the game did need something more of a modern remake to keep it in line with the rest of the series, which is where AM2R comes in. Or I suppose Nintendo can make an official one. Will that ever happen though? 5 years after playing and beating Metroid 2, the long-awaited fan remake AM2R finally saw a release and gained significant mainstream attention as part of the social media dominated world. And Nintendo saw fit to cease and desist the game. In 2016, Nintendo put out a new Metroid game, the first in 6 years, and it was a spin-off. Fan outcry was at an all-time high, and it made the cease and desist for AM2R all the more noticeable. The game Nintendo put out was Metroid Prime Federation Force.
The 12th Metroid game is in captivity.
I have seen a lot of talk about this game, and how it was exactly what the Metroid franchise didn't need. I've seen the game generally discussed in regards to the rest of the series. I haven't really seen much talk about the events of this game during actual Metroid retrospectives, so we're going to be going over this game in quite some detail. This is the game I wasn't quite so sure counted as one or two games, and that's because of Rocket League. I mean Metroid Prime Blast Ball. Funny, this was shown off at E3 not long before Rocket League came out and became a massive hit. Talk about bad timing. Federation Force is set after Metroid Prime 3 and sees the Galactic Federation realise that they need to stop being useless. They develop new technology to help their troops compete on a similar level to Samus and establish the Federation Force, a group of soldiers who fight the space pirates in mech suits. The Federation decrees that the space pirates must be wiped out once and for all. Led by General Alex Miles, the Federation Force travels to the Bermuda system, which consists of 3 planets, Excelsior, Talvania, and Bion. There they discover a large amount of space pirate activity, and a series of missions begin where the Federation has to take down the space pirates. Though even though the Federation are front and centre this time, in typical Federation fashion, they still hire Samus to investigate. The first major boss battle in the game, Sorkin, feels remarkably familiar as it plays quite a lot like the Chica Lava fight from Prime 2. I played this entire game solo using the power-up assist to help me throughout a game that would otherwise be designed for co-op. It was pretty brutal. Sorkin took multiple attempts to defeat, but it almost certainly wasn't the hardest boss in the game. That honour goes to the Rockall Beetle on Bion, which took me forever to defeat. By far the hardest part of the entire game in a solo playthrough. The game's power-ups, instead of the usual Metroid affair, come in the form of mods. You can only apply a certain amount of mods at a time, and they allow you to gain different buffs. Switching them out depending on the planet is expected in order to be able to beat the mission. You also get a bunch of temporary power-ups like health recovery, shields and missiles. The game continues on at a pace, with varied missions and some puzzles which are okay, I guess. There are missions where you have to infiltrate a space pirate base and blow it up, as well as a mission where you protect a drill. Several moments in the game require you to get out of your mech and travel around, at which point the game switches to a third-person mode. But even then, the graphical style makes these Federation soldiers look a lot shorter than they would otherwise. I should probably explain that these missions always resort to a retreat back to the base after they're complete. Luigi's Mansion 2 on the 3DS did the exact same thing. Both games were developed by Next Level Games, and I guess given the handheld format, the game is deliberately designed like this so that you can play the game in short bursts and come back to it later, something that we often see in Nintendo handheld games. Speaking of this, the graphical style of the game has been criticised quite a bit, but I think it comes down to the type of 3D that the 3DS can handle. Several 3DS titles like Mario Kart 7, Luigi's Mansion 2, Pokemon X and Y and A Link Between Worlds do not go for a realistic looking graphic style, and the models they use for their characters are very distinctive. This tells me that the 3DS was optimised for a certain style of 3D graphics, and this explains why Next Level took the chibi style. They're probably more familiar with these types of graphic styles due to work on Punch-Out and Luigi's Mansion than they were with the more realistic graphical style of the Prime games. I've often heard that apathy is often worse than being hated, which perhaps not something I should be saying on this channel lore. But anyway, I feel like this is the fate of Federation Force. It was immediately discarded by the fan base, and its multiplayer nature meant that people felt they had to play the game in multiplayer. Given the vastly unpopular nature of this game, getting 4 people to play this game seemed unlikely. So the actual game itself, while being a serviceable spin-off to the franchise, was dead on arrival, just because of the circumstances surrounding its announcement. What a shame for Next Level Games, who got the chance to make a Metroid game, and no one was interested in it. In many ways, it is a victim of the malaise that the franchise has fallen into after the release of Metroid Other M. But Federation Force doesn't help matters by the fact that the soundtrack is just as bland as Other M's. I've seriously struggled to use background music for this segment. While a lot of the game is functional, given the franchise it is in, it lacks that amount of memorable moments, and the mission-based structure makes it harder to care about each one before it's discarded and moved on to the next one. You often remember how a game begins and how a game ends more than what's in between. And unfortunately, Federation Force has the worst final boss in the entire series. After the assassination of Samus' character in Other M, the franchise was in need of a kick-up backside. This final boss, however, just furthered the idea that the franchise was dead. Who should be the final boss of the game when you play as the Galactic Federation? The entire game sees you in conflict with the Space Pirates, and the final level sees you infiltrate their big destructive weapon, the Doom's Eye. Maybe revive the Omega Pirates or something? A battle with Ridley, perhaps? A Federation trooper fighting Ridley would be interesting, but then that would be too predictable, so how about Samus? Wait, what? Yes, Samus is the final boss of Metroid Prime Federation Force. In the most contrived of circumstances possible, the Space Pirates have taken Samus hostage and put her under mind control, a situation I find to be entirely unbelievable. The Space Pirates have always been pretty dumb, and Samus has shown far more competence than any Federation trooper ever has, so this entire scenario seems a bit far-fetched, and they don't really explain too much other than it happened. But wait, it gets worse. A fight against Samus would be pretty cool character, admittedly, so there's a lot of good things they can do with this concept. You could have a gunfight with Samus. Makes sense. I mean, there's also another option to enlarge Samus and force her to transform into morphable mode all the time, but that seems a bit unlike Oh no. Oh no! Yep, this pile of trash is Federation Force's final boss fight. And it is monotonous as it seems. You spend the entire thing trying to shoot Samus's Morph Ball core to temporarily stun her, and then shoot her into the electric force field surrounding the area in order to damage her. All the while, a generic, unmemorable final boss music track plays. What is this boss? It's an absolute atrocity. The concept of a fight against Samus seemed interesting, but not like this. This is just terrible. Later on she gets the ability to use the Spider Ball, making it harder to disable her Morph Ball form. But even so, Samus is more than just the Morph Ball. This entire video is proof of that. Why next level? Why? It might be something to do with the fact that this game has Blast Ball as part of the package. In that game, you have to manipulate a giant ball by shooting it into the goal. It's a fun mode, but it suffers from bad timing when Rocket League is a far more polished and ultimately fun product about hitting a ball into a goal in more unconventional ways. Clearly Next Level wanted to use that mechanic in the main game itself, and giving Samus's alternate form as a ball, it makes sense, but this entire battle is poorly executed. We do have one more battle after this. Well, this game is set after Prime 3 where organic supercomputers are rife throughout the galaxy, so one had to show up in Federation Force, right? Well, here we go. Master Brain, perhaps the most obscure boss in Metroid history. You fight this boss after disabling the generator, as the rest of the Federation shoot at the weapon in order to destroy it. But you're still on the Doom's Eye. We have a classic Metroid escape sequence. You have to leg it out of the Doom's Eye before it explodes, as well as taking down some high-ranking space pirates. Or you would do, but now Samus is free of mind control, she shows up in the nick of time to save the Federation. Again! The last portion of the game sees you running down a corridor where you get sucked out into space as the Doom's Eye blows up, and then the ending plays. The Federation destroys the Doom's Eye, and while your trooper is sucked into space, Samus's ship from Prime 3 shows up to collect you. Alex Miles then chimes in to tell you that you, the Federation Force, are the heroes of the galaxy. And so ends Metroid Prime Federation Force. Well, not quite. There's one more thing of note. If you beat Prime 3 with 100%, you got a mysterious ending cutscene. It is something that many speculated on at the time, but it looked like Sylux's ship from Metroid Prime Hunters. Yeah, that's Sylux. He had some unknown hatred towards the Federation, and unexpectedly he shows up in this game too. You only see the first person perspective as he infiltrates the Federation with his eyes set on a Metroid. Something is going on here. Seems like something big. Set up for a new Major Prime game. But the series is supposed to be zombified. It surely couldn't be waking up. While Federation Force, for many, was confirmation of this franchise's death, in actuality it was the start of a slow wake up from its slumber. Metroid would return to its former glory as soon as the next year. With the Nintendo Switch out, a new era of Metroid was about to kick off, with two major announcements. The reveal of Metroid Prime 4, and after Nintendo had taken down the long-awaited AM2R, it turns out, far from being dead, Nintendo had been working on a proper Metroid all along. They had been making their own remake of Metroid 2, and it would be this game that would finally free Metroid from the 7-year purgatory it had been experiencing. Spanish developers Mercury Steam would ultimately become the saviours of the franchise as they released Metroid Samus Returns.
The 13th Metroid game is in captivity.
After all the trials and tribulations of the last 10 years, where Metroid abandoned having any sorts of memorable soundtrack and lost its mojo under the stewardship of Team Ninja and Next Level Games, though it should be noted it's not entirely their fault that their games turned out like they did. It was refreshing to have a new, proper Metroid game to play again after all these years. The Metroid drought had seen me move over to other franchises, with Ratchet & Clank filling in the sci-fi gap in my gaming appetite. By 2017, I was more than ready for new entries in gaming franchises I hadn't played in years, and because 2017 was ridiculous in terms of the game released that year, if there was a game you wanted, chances are it was going to be released in 2017. Well, apart from Smash Bros, but we got that a year later. Samus Returns was an unexpected surprise, but when you boot up the game and listen to that soundtrack, it really does sound like that classic Metroid feel is back. Samus Returns mixes up the original game by making the areas a lot more colourful and expanding Samus's movements even beyond the first game. The major new moves added to the previous 2D movesets were a new melee counter as well as a full 360 degree aiming. These were designed in a way to evolve the Metroid formula. Mercury Steam had previously worked on the Castlevania Lords of Shadow series for Konami, making them the only developer to have worked on both sides of the Metroidvania label. Lords of Shadow Mirror Fate features a melee counter, and it was this game which convinced Mercury Steam to implement this into Samus Returns. Unfortunately, this melee counter is used a bit too much, at least early in the game. After you get more upgrades, you will find yourself being able to roast enemies easily, but enemies are super aggressive towards you to the point that for about half the game, melee counters are pretty much necessary. The game has all the returning aspects of Samus's arsenal. Wait, what do you mean the speed booster isn't in the game? Really? Come on! This also includes the spider ball in the 2D game for the first time since Metroid 2, allowing Samus to scale across multiple ceilings. I spent forever crawling along every ceiling in order to find all those missile expansions and energy tanks. It would be easy to just throw all the old power-ups back in there and not include any new power-ups, and Samus Returns introduces the Aeon abilities, a new selection of power-ups that you acquire by travelling through Chozo Beaks. The first one is a scan pulse, which allows you to check your surroundings for hidden power-ups, which is thankfully optional. It was somewhat controversial at the time of release, but looking back it's clear Mercury Steam were actually taking steps to modernise Metroid and introduce a few quality of life features, and this one at least gives you an option on whether you want to use it. Thankfully, the other Aeon abilities are more interesting. Lightning Armour prevents physical damage and increases the range of melee attacks, and is needed to get through certain areas of the game. Beam Burst, which increases the potency and rapid fire potential of your currently equipped beams, and the Phase Drift, which slows down time and allows Samus to travel across crumbling blocks. Oh, that's why the speed booster isn't in this game. The areas in this game are also massively expanded from Metroid 2, while loosely being based on the original maps, which you could only ever find if you looked up on fan-made maps on the internet. Like Zero Mission, there are new bosses included into the mix alongside regular boss battles against the Metroids, which are now far more action-packed. Though, the Gamma Metroids, which retreat into other rooms mid-battle, are super annoying to deal with. The Metroid encounters do get a bit repetitive, but that was always going to be hard to overcome given this game's premise. Mercury Steam did at least try to improve the variety and difficulty of individual Metroid species after you fought a few, so you were at least kept on your toes. There is one boss that's a major addition to the game though, and that's Diggernaut. This enemy is built up extremely well. At one point, you mysteriously activate this robot unintentionally. Later on, after killing a few Metroids, you put into a frantic chase sequence that requires pitch-perfect execution in order to beat it. And finally, after you finish Area 6, you get the true battle against Diggernaut. This battle is hard and long, and the way to damage him constantly changes as the battle progresses. This battle took me forever to beat. He was really challenging. So satisfying to finally beat him though and claim the power bomb, which has a cool pseudo shine sparks feature that you can use to propel Samus on Spider-Ball mode and blast through obstacles to the other side. Metroid Samus Returns is mostly challenging, but after beating Diggernaut, the rest of the game is dialed down a bit. There aren't that many Metroids anymore, though the remaining Omega Metroids do pose a bit of a challenge. At this point in the original game, there's practically barely any life, and this is the point where you can see the difference with Samus Returns. Metroid 2 had a lack of enemies as a metaphor for how dangerous the area was given the amount of Metroids there were, given they are supposed to drain all life. Samus Returns, however, still features the same enemies you've been seeing all game. Eventually, when there's only one Metroid left, the number starts to increase. If you've already seen the Metroid 2 segment in this video, you should know what this is. It's the Queen Metroid. She's been showing a fair bit in the games we've been covering on this video recently. The Queen Metroid fight is a bit more intense this time around, and her attacks are somewhat difficult to dodge, but after a long and grueling fight, Samus defeats the Queen Metroid, only to find a lone baby Metroid. It hatches, but rather than killing it, Samus decides to spare it. In a series of caverns populated by enemies, Samus must travel with this Metroid back to her ship, while the baby Metroid eats pieces of scenery. You also get access to the teleporters, allowing you to backtrack. If you notice carefully, the blockages that could only be cleared with a baby Metroid
The baby.
have in fact been blocking previous power-ups in 8. Oh, we have something going on here. Oh yeah, I never really mentioned the teleporters, did I? These are a new feature that allows Samus to backtrack to previous areas without having to wade through the actual segments of the planet. Normally I complain about these given that interconnected level design should be a way to travel between areas, but Metroid 2 was never that kind of map design anyway. It was more a series of linear pathways. Thus, the teleporters are a great addition to this game that cut back what would otherwise be needless backtracking. Anyway, Samus and the baby Metroid travel to Samus' ship as Samus looks to take the baby Metroid back to the Federation. Oh yeah! I forgot! Ridley is in this game! The Queen Metroid is not the final boss! In an unexpected twist, Ridley shows up to steal the baby Metroid, and Samus must fend Ridley off in a grueling action-packed 3-phase fight. This fight has been deemed incredibly fan-servicey, but I honestly don't mind. If you look carefully, it shows Ridley transitioning from his Meta Ridley form from the Prime games back to the more organic form from Super Metroid, helping to bridge the gap back to the main series from the Prime games. Also, it gives more purpose and motivation for Ridley to steal the baby Metroid in Super Metroid. Anyway, Samus defeats Ridley and saves the baby Metroid, leaving SR388 having exterminated all but one of the Metroids. And so ends Metroid Samus Returns. There is, however, more to the story than what was shown. There are a series of unlockable Chozo memories that showcase the backstory of the Chozo on planet SR388 and how they created the Metroids. Wait, the Chozo created the Metroids? Oh yeah, we haven't really been privy to that yet in this video, have we? Well, it's quite an extensive backstory, but the Chozo have been commonly depicted as kind-hearted and benevolent. After unveiling the whole story, however, it turns out there was one Chozo which betrayed his entire race and killed them all. Huh? That is a very interesting twist to explain why the Chozo died out in the first place. I am intrigued to know more about this. Hopefully we get another game to be able to flesh this out a bit more and we can actually meet this Chozo and find out their motivations. So, why did the Chozo create the Metroids? Well, the ending to Samus Returns does give a big hint to why. There was a far more threatening species on SR388 that would take over the entire galaxy if left unchecked. That is the X-Parasite. Wait, the entire Metroid species has been wiped out now. Oh no, what does that mean for the future? Could it be that destroying all Metroids was a mistake? Well, after the events of Super Metroid on Zebes and Planet Zebes being blown up, Samus would later return to planet SR388 in the final game that we're looking at for this video, and the last Metroid game I played, Metroid Fusion.
The last Metroid game is in captivity. The galaxy is at peace.
So, full disclosure, I had already watched multiple Metroid Fusion playthroughs by the time I finally decided to play this game. However, doing a Let's Play of Metroid Prime 2 on the channel got me back into wanting to play Metroid games, and I took this opportunity to play the only Metroid game that I hadn't played by this point, which just so happens to be the last in the series, Metroid Fusion. Samus and the Federation are on a routine mission on SR388. They attack some enemies there, and a mysterious life form emerges from them. The Federation and Samus' weapons don't work on it, and the parasite attacks. Things seem normal at first, but things take a drastic turn for the worst when Samus is paralysed by this mysterious organism, and her ship drifts into an asteroid field. After all this time, Samus' life is now at stake, and she is close to death. But, remember why the Chozo created the Metroids? Yeah, turns out Metroids were the cure to ridding this mysterious life form, known as the X-Parasite. Someone has a cure with an extract from the last Metroid, and this is able to save Samus' life, but at the cost of losing her trademark power suit. Instead, having a more deformed look and now incorporating Metroid DNA into her makeup. As a result, cold environments will freeze her to death. Samus is then sent to the bottle ship, the BSL station, to investigate an explosion. Unfortunately, the X have taken over this space station, and Samus' constant investigations eventually reveals the Arachnus of Metroid 2, but now infected with an X-Parasite. However, it gets even more interesting when this happens. Yep, there's an X mimicking Samus. Known as the SAX, this mysterious life form shows up multiple times during the course of the game. When it shows up, you are forced to hide as the SAX will kill you on sight. This leads to incredible tension and having to avoid this thing at all costs. But eventually, you are forced to run from the SAX and have to be pitch perfect in order to be able to avoid this thing. The game is unfortunately once again quite linear, and this is because Fusion has a much more in-depth story than the 2D games that came before it, though not quite to the extent we would see in Other M. Though curiously, Other M borrowed heavily from this game's story for its story. Other M's story wasn't even original in the Metroid series. The computer in Samus's new ship is constantly giving instructions and telling Samus where to go. Samus notes how the computer reminds her of Adam Malkovich. What, you thought he was introduced in Other M? Nope, not at all. This was his actual introduction. This was the first game to try and flesh out Samus's backstory considerably.
As I listened to the briefing, my thoughts turned to Adam. The real Adam understood well. He would end orders by saying, "Any objections, lady?" He knew I wouldn't disagree. That was just his way of noting our trust. I wonder if I can trust this computer, too.
There are 6 sectors in the BSL station in addition to the main segment, but the order you explore them in is a bit out of order. You don't stay in each sector for long. After one mission in Sector 1, you go to Sector 2, then Sector 4, Sector 3, Sector 6, and finally Sector 5. Right after this, however, the X strike. Samus must rush back to Sector 3 to disable the boiler in order to stop the space station from exploding. It's hard to forget this section when Emergency in Sector 3 is constantly playing. After this, you are finally able to return to the main deck, where you find that the animals from Planet Zebes are on the BSL station. So yeah, it's canon that Samus saved the animals. As the game progresses, something seems afoot. Samus starts getting power-ups that her ship doesn't tell her about. Mission objectives lock you off from being able to talk to your computer, and the Federation are talking to your computer, asking if Samus suspects anything. It seems like something mysterious is going on in this space station. You're acquiring new upgrades off the beaten path as you re-explore previous areas and find new segments of them. Eventually the truth is revealed. The Federation used a sample of Metroid DNA from the last Metroid to create more Metroids. Didn't the Federation want to eliminate them? Well, now they see the potential in using Metroids as a bioweapon. The SAX is also in this segment, however, and sets off the self-destruct sequence, detaching the lab from the station and seemingly killing the SAX right there. Or it would have been if it weren't for the fact that the SAX has apparently reproduced 10 times. This is almost immediately undercut by the fact that we only ever get to see one other SAX as the game comes towards the end. But more information is revealed showing that the Federation is now interested in the SAX. Samus is ordered to leave the BSL station and let the Federation capture the SAX for study purposes. However, Samus knows better, that the X would only infect the arriving Federation troops and absorb their spacefaring knowledge to conquer the universe. Samus states her intention to destroy the station. Although the computer initially intends to stop Samus, she calls it Adam, and reveals that Adam died saving her life. The computer suggests that she should alter the station's propulsion to intercept with SR-388 and destroy the planet along with all X populations. Samus realises that the computer is the consciousness of Adam, uploaded after death. So the final encounter is set up. Samus sets to alter the course of the station to destroy it and save the galaxy from the X before the Federation arrives. She finds herself a Federation rebel for the first time in her life. The SAX shows up, and Samus is finally able to defeat it before activating the mechanism. It's time for another escape sequence. But on the way back, instead of finding her ship, Samus finds an Omega Metroid. None of her weapons work, not even the new ice missiles which debuted in this game and later appeared in Prime 3. But then the SAX shows up, and against all expectations, Samus is able to merge with the SAX, get her Ice Beam back and dispatch the Omega Metroid. Samus leaves the BSL station on her ship with assistance from the animals saved on Zebes and departs the space station. This is the last known event in the Metroid chronology up to this point. It would have been the cut-off point with an interesting unknown future for Samus, but now we have Metroid Dread, which will answer a lot of questions as well as flesh out certain aspects. I am very intrigued to get a continuation of this story, and I'm glad Fusion ended up being the last Metroid game I played, given the next one we are playing is essentially its continuation. And that is every Metroid game that I've ever played, and indeed every Metroid game that there has ever been. With a renewed interest in the franchise thanks to Metroid Dread coming out this year, Metroid could have a bright future, or it could go out on a high and leave us on a much brighter note than the one it left on. Metroidvania has become a favourite genre in the indie scene, so it's nice to have the originator of the genre back on the AAA gaming scene. Hopefully Metroid Dread is a great game and a worthy follow-up to Fusion 19 years later. For now, that is it for this Gaming Anniversaries video. Scrolling on the screen right now, you can see all the footage of YouTubers I have used footage from. I have mostly recorded footage for Metroid Prime Hunters, Other M, a bit of Prime, all of Prime 2 and Prime 3, as well as some of Metroid Fusion. But for all the other Metroid games I have sourced footage, so the scrolling names on screen now show who the videos come from. Next time we'll be taking a look at Sonic the Hedgehog. So, thank you for watching this video. Please like the video if you enjoyed it. Please share this with your friends so we can get more people watching the channel. Please subscribe for more gaming and TCG content and hit that notification bell so that you can be notified when new videos come out. Also follow me on Twitter at GenericAperson, all one word. Thank you for watching. I've been A-Person, goodbye!